We continue now, chapter 73, the bottom of page Kuf Lamed Vav, 136. So he discussed the 5 levels within Birchus Yotzer, and and I was going to say, and more specifically, you can say, Kol HaMadregas Ha'elu B'chinas Malchus D'Atzilus. So we spoke more like macrocosmic picture. Now he's going to explain the same 5 levels are all in Malchus of Atzilus. Because if you remember, if you go back to the beginning of this discussion, the beginning of chapter 69, when he started the whole thing with the Makifim of Yotzer of the worlds, if you remember, he said the 4 or 5 levels of Berachamecha, he said the Denizim Chins Hamakiv the Malchus D'Atzilus K'moishu B'Atzilus V'achkach Tzur Mezgavenu and Gim Makifim the Gimel El Mezbiyah. So here we just discussed that Adenu Zenu is the Shir Atzmei B'Keach, Malchus the Ein Sof. And then come the 3 levels of B'Yad the Klolos, where you have Tzur Mizgavenu, Mogin Yeshenu, and the Mizgav Ba'adenu. So he's going to say the same thing. You could, in microcosm, it's Malchus of Atzilus and B'Yah HaPratim. So basically, he's just explaining these 5 levels now after Tzimtzum and in Atzilus. So essentially, like I said many times, this is like a macrocosm, like a hologram. The same levels, it depends on which way you're speaking. But this, I believe, is not in Sharet Tshuva, Sharet Tefillah. This is the Rebbe Rashab's complete edition, which is also a part of Atzmus that we spoke in the previous chapter. It says, Malchus D'Atzilus, meaning Atzilus the Pratis, he means. Yeah. There's Yesh Leimahs all over the place. If you look Yesh Leimah here, Yesh Leimah there, like by Macharacha Marab, Yesh Leimah Shubchin Ze'er Hagilim in Atzmus, because that doesn't say it clearly by the Mittler Rebbe. Right. Dehina Yedua B'inyan Notz T'glasim B'Seifon, because now it's known in the Inyan of Notz T'glasim B'Seifon. You see, that's why I wanted to also refer to, because he uses this in the Chazer. What's Notz T'glasim B'Seifon B'Tchilasim? Let's just explain this expression. This is from Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah says, when he talks about the 10 spheres, he says, Eser sphere is Bli Ma, Eser v'lei Teisha, Eser v'lei Achadosa. Then he says, Notz Sefer B'Tchilasim B'Sefer, which means, Notz means wedged. The Itza. The beginning is wedged in the end. B'Sefer B'Tchilasim, the end is wedged in the beginning. We use sometimes the expression I mentioned before, Seif Maisa B'Machshava Tchila. We say in L'Chodeidi. Seif Maisa means the end of the action is what originates in the beginning of the Machshava. Essentially, when you envision something, you want the end product. You don't just want the first steps. In creating it, you have to go through step 1, step 2, step 3. But the beginning of your Machshava is wedged in the end of the conclusion of the project. Same thing here. We also use this often when we say Maskifin Haschol Hashlama by Simchus Teira. When we finish the Teira, we say right away, Maskifin Haschol Hashlama, you right away, when you end, you always begin. Also, Hadran Allah, we make a siyum, you always right away start. For this reason. Besides the fact that you don't, by Kedusha there's no end, you always graduate to the next level, and the Rebbe emphasized what a graduation is, but there's also a deeper thing. The end and the beginning are wedged in each other. So Me'emasai begins with a mem, the Teirus ends with a mem. Okay. So now he says, like, you do it, now it's known in this inyan of Notz T'chilasim B'Seifon that the beginning is wedged in the end. So Yesh Ni'itzos Haschola B'Seif Yesem B'Reish HaMispashet. That there is a wedging of the beginning and the end more than in the Reish HaMispashet, the beginning of the head that begins to extend and extend. So if you think of, let's say, a body, think in terms of Reish being the beginning, the legs, the bottom of the body is the sof, Reish Seif, not Tchilosan, B'Seifon, more than in the Reish. Now, Tchila here means more than higher than Reish. The Reish and Sof is the structure. So the Rosh comes first, but the Sof has more of the Haskalah than the Rosh has. That's what he's saying. The V'hainu, the B'chinas Malchus. Now he's saying V'hainu. This means the level of Malchus who's safe at the Kol Dargin Datzilus. Malchus, which is the lowest level, the lowest of all levels in Atzilus. Yesh boni itzes haskalah yesime b'chochma shireishes Atzilus. It has wedged in at the beginning more than Chochma, which is the beginning and the head of Atzilus. Now remember, the Eishis of Baruch Sha'amar, remember, Baruch Eiseh Bereishis was Chochma. And remember, Baruch Merachim ala Aretz, I don't know if he's going to refer to this here, is Aretz, is Malchus. But we'll soon see if that's what he's going, that's where he's going. Dinei Chochma Reishis Ishtalshlus. Now, because Chochma is now the head and beginning of Ishtalshlus. Tam Shochem HaChochma Labinu B'chinas Ila V'ol. Because the transmission from Chochma to Bina is in a form of cause and effect. It basically means a commensurate, proportionate flow. It's not a jump. And even though we explained earlier that chapter 41 and 42, remember that's where he explained the gradation, the hierarchy of the spheres, and he said that Chachma Bina are fundamentally different levels. So he explained there that the Chachma Bina hein Ayin Beis, the Chachma Bina is an Ayin Beis. There's a parenthesis that ends where? It's a long parenthesis. Yeah, it's not short, it looks like.
Right in the middle of the page.
Mamish in the middle, smack.
Drop low in the middle of the page.
Huh?
No,
not even there, no. It's,
I think the page is up over here. Is that right? One of them goes through.
yeah, I think they may even end up, you mean all the way on top of page Kuf Lamed Ches? Yeah, I think so. Wow. Okay, so this chapter is basically going to be one long parenthesis. Let's just be forewarned. So we're not even getting into Not Sefer Mitchilas until next chapter. Okay, fine, so be it. Okay, so let's just compose ourselves here. I think it ends there. Is that correct? Ayin Beis as well, Perek Mem Beis. That's where it ends. Yeah, it's a whole page. Okay, so we have here is after the question is what this parenthesis, how critical it is for this whole Avana. But let me see. So just not to lose the train of thought and to compose ourselves, we're taking now a Maimon was good with the Rebbe Rashab. But his point of departure is not. We're not going to forget. His point of departure is that everything we explained in the 5 levels of Yotzer, 5 makifim of Naran Chai, he's now going to explain the Malchus of Atzilus, and he begins because Malchus of Atzilus is the kavanah, of the purpose of the whole thing, is more in Malchus. You see it more in Malchus, and it rests more in Malchus, wedged in Malchus more than it is in Chochmah. Then he begins an explanation now of this process of how Chochmah works, I guess, before we go back to Malchus. So he asks a question. You just said Chochmah Bina work commensurate. Remember, because we're going to have like this. Malchus is the end of the process. It's going to be Eretz, land, earth, creation. Chochmah Bina is the beginning of the process. So he's trying to explain here, Chochmah Bina are more or less part of a gradation that goes one step after the other. I just should add that in the other Pirush of Baruch Sha'amar, it goes like this. It goes, Baruch Sha'amar is Ak, or as he puts it, Radlo, that comes from Malchus of Ak. Baruch Hu is Chochmas Tima, is Galgalta the Arich Ampin. Baruch Emer V'Eiseh is Meichus Tima. Baruch Eiseh Bereishis, Baruch Gezer V'Kayim is Chochmah. Baruch Eiseh Bereishis is Bina of Atzilus. And then he continues all the others as well. It goes down the worlds of Biyah. I'm just, yeah.
No Baruch Hosei there.
What?
No Baruch Hosei there.
I don't know. I think not. Not that interpretation, not. So now he's saying, Vagamshin is the Chochmah Bina, explained there, the Chochmah Bina Ayin Beis. He just said that it's Ilav Ol, which means they're commensurate to each other. One flows into the next. One is an effect, cause and effect.
Right,
Right. So there he says Ayin Beis. Bina eina masiga ha'ayin de Chochma. Bina does not comprehend the ayin of Chochma. It's two different worlds, which seemingly is not like Ilavol. Ilavol, the effect can appreciate and understand the cause. It's higher than it, but it's like a teacher and student that are comparable. Ayin Beis is what's the word? Infinitely distant, disproportionate. And it's explained that the primary knowledge and awareness in Chochmah is in the form of Riyah, of seeing, or Samtus, in the form of resonance and truth, that you recognize its truth. That is back there in those chapters. And also the Nekudas Haskalah, which means the primary Chochmah is primarily a certain type of clarity, awareness, and truthful and resonance that comes like in seeing something. When you see something, Bina doesn't have that. And even the Nekudas Haskalah, Chochmah, on the other hand, does have some Nekudah. There is some Seichel involved. There is a spark, a point of comprehension. Even though it's a Sichli, that's all explained there. The main thing there is the Hanocha B'Sichli, the leg in Seichel. Hanocha B'Sichli meaning that type of resoluteness and knowing and sensing this is correct. The Hanocha Sichlis. In other words, it's like a type of establishing. How do we translate it when we learned it back then? So Leitzach.
Conviction.
Conviction, yeah, that was the word I used, right? Conviction, yeah. Yeah. So both the Chochmah in general is not something comprehended in Bina because it's like seeing something, that type of truth. And even the Nekuda is also primarily a conviction. This is the Ayin of Chochmah. This is the substanceless of Chochmah that's not comprehended by Bina in Bina. So we have a question on the table. So how do you say Ilavahol? Nevertheless, the emanation or the imparting of Atzilus, the imparting of Bina from Chochmah is not in the form of Yesh Ma'ayin. It's not like creation from nothing, something from nothing. Because in truth, the essence of Bina, its fundamental essence and identity doesn't come from Chochmah. We'll read it and then I'll explain it. Why? Because we're going to talk here about what Bina gets from Chochmah, as we shall see, is the direction. Chochmah has an idea and Bina takes it somewhere. But the comprehension of Bina comes from a different place because Chochmah doesn't have comprehension. Bina is, in that sense, Bina is a yesh. So not yesh ma'ayin as in like existence, like our physical existence can't trace its source because its source is spiritual and this is material. Here, yesh ma'ayin is more going to be because Bina is a yesh. It has a different way of communicating and understanding than Chochmah does. But let's read it inside. So this is just giving us a deeper understanding. Why is this relevant to this section here? We'll find out. Hopefully it is. Because it seems like he's going back to something back there. And that was all about Er Pnimi, if you remember. Now we're talking about Er Makif. So in general, it's interesting how this is going to fit in. But I'm sure it has a connection. I mean, no way he's just bringing it out of the blue here. But let's see. So Be'emes is saying, Sav Sabim is not from Etzem Husam in Chochmah. Its essential personality does not come from Chochmah. As it's known that Bina has its own unique source in the Kayach HaMaskil, in the collective unconscious, or you could say the source of Seichel, the root of Seichel, Kayach HaMaskil. I'm always looking for a good translation. I get it, my Chochmah gets it, my Bina doesn't. It's Kayach HaMaskil, think of it like it's like a generator of electricity. But it's a generator. It's a generator of all ideas. So it's not really an idea even. You go in there, you're not going to find ideas.
So Chochmah Bina goes what it's carrying, but the
right.
Essential thing it's created.
Kayach HaMaskil reminds me, it's somewhat reminiscent of what he said in the previous chapter, that it's a makil, all the makifim, but it's not a makif. In other words, yeah. That's a very good, important point, because we're talking about, you asked me before, we talk about the levels of understanding. It's important to come to realize that when you look about, we're looking to retrace the steps, right? That when you look at an entity, the first step is you find the entity in a more sublime state. then in the more sublime. Then you come to a point where you know there's a source for it, but the source is no way similar to the entity. Then there's a point where you can't even call it a source. See what I'm saying? I think that's why he's explaining this, because he's coming to help understand that. Let's see. So it has its own makar in Koyach HaMaskal. So if you think of the Koyach HaMaskal, think of it as a brain, an idea, a mind generator of seichel. One channel is Chochmah, and another one is Bina. Chochmah is sparks of ideas, and Hanocha, like seeing and conviction and all that. And another one is the ability to comprehend, to analyze, to break down into detail, and so on. It's two different energies coming out of the Koyach HaMaskal. That's how he's explaining it. He's got a perfect proof. That's why you have someone who's a Bala Saga, meaning a master of comprehension. Master of conceiving, Hasaga, Chochmah. And he's not a Balavana, and he's not a master of comprehension.
Hasaga is usually used with Bina.
It depends. Sometimes it's used on Chochmah. Hasaga is Chochmah. Here, Hasaga is it could be used, it could be interpretable. But here, he's using Hasaga as more the spark of the Chochmah. That's what he's saying here. It's like saying someone's a Chochmah and not a Maven, you know. Balavana, what is he? A person who comprehends well, even though he doesn't have the power to conceive of a new idea. Nevertheless, he has the power to understand every seichel with a good comprehension. Here he uses hasaga. It's interchangeable. It's not back to the word. But he can understand it with hasaga teva, with a good understanding. You see this. We talked about this in companies, in businesses, and so on. You have people who are innovators. You have people who are flesh or outers, whatever you want to call them. There's some people who are brilliant and just come up with ideas, but ask them to spell it out and break it down, they're not good at all. And you always want to have someone else who's excellent. He doesn't conceive, but you give him something, and he'll make it into a beautiful. Huh? Yeah. No, you definitely have this. You have these people. A lot of geniuses have the idea thing, but they can't do the next step well, and it's understandable because they actually contradict each other in a way. They don't have the patience for the details. But on the other hand, you can't even implement something if you don't have the details. Okay, so he's proving. So he's saying. So you see clearly there are two different channels. And the primary thing with Bina is it's the state of Rechiv. Rechiv is width, breadth, expansion. To break down into all the details that are in the spark, in the point, in the dot of the concept. That he receives from someone else. So you receive a point, and Bina's power is harchava, the expansion of the idea into details. V'gam lovei, another thing, al emek eyin, and also to come to the depth of the subject. In the spark, in the nekuda, you may not see the depth or appreciate the depth. Like it says elsewhere. So if that's the case, they have different roots. So then what exactly is when you say Bina comes from Chachma? It doesn't come from Chachma, it comes from its own. So it's only the revelation of it comes.
People think it's carrying.
Yeah, exactly. Chachma is a carrier in that sense. Okay, so that reveals it alone. Only reveals it. What does it reveal? It reveals the comprehension of Bina, but not the actual faculty called Bina. Because the essential faculty of Bina has its own unique, its own distinct source. Canal, like you mentioned before. Only the understanding of Bina, that cannot be without the spark and without the point of Chachma. So the idea, in other words, Bina has the ability to comprehend, but what are you going to comprehend? You have to have something to comprehend. So you can't have it without, you have to have some type of some nekudas Chachma that feeds it. So he's almost like saying two things in a way. One is that Chachma gives Bina what to think about, and number two, it carries also the power of Hasaga from, but he didn't really say that specifically. Not necessarily, no. He's going to say, you think?
No, you're just saying that he's giving an example of Noah B'lei Mayim.
Yeah. It's not exactly the same thing, because then it would be.
Like it inspires the understanding.
The truth is, you don't have to say what I just said. No, I withdraw it, because you could very much say that Bina has its power. It just doesn't have water.
It doesn't have what to use.
Right. But it's like, let's put it this way: a riverbed is there. You know.
This has bothered me for 30 years. I resolved it. It's resolved.
Really?
I never could understand it. Now it always said that Chachma makes Bina, and I never understood it, and now I really.
Okay.
It bothered me mamish 30 years. Okay?
Anything else bothering you 30 years?
Well, you'll see.
No, because this is going to make you very responsible now, because now you're freeing up hard drive. You're going to have to use it for something.
I don't have much left.
Look, when you agonize over good things, you have no room to agonize over bad things. So, don't worry. Trust me, for every answer you're going to get, you're going to have 30 more questions. So the next 30 years, you're going to have plenty of... I'm glad. I'm very glad. You want to say l'chaim? 30 years, you can make a siyum just on that.
In the parentheses.
Anyway, don't jump the gun, because I'm sure you're soon going to say a line that's going to throw you. And you'll say, oh no, I thought I got it. Okay. Be very humble in this process. Trust me. Just when you think you get it, like from the left. So that's it. Okay. Just like it cannot be a river without a spring, source of water.
Like in a function level, it says that the hasaga of Bina comes above.
The savas hasaga masichli shebenekudus haskola, and the savas hasaga, the development, the emergence, the coming into being of this comprehension, is from the seichel, from the sichli, the intelligence in the spark of chachma, shezah b'derech ilava'ol, and that is in the form of ilava'ol. So not Bina is, if you talk about hasaga, if you're talking about hasaga came from chachma, that's yeshmayin. Chachma Nekuda is a completely different world. How does seeing end up in hearing? Or how does that conviction and so on, as he said, Chachma is a ayin, kama yesh. But if you're talking about not the root, we're not talking about Bina's personality, we're talking about what it's understanding. Yes, that's ilavol. It starts with a spark, and then it develops into a full idea. Like it starts with a mayon, a spring of water, and as it keeps gushing, it turns into a river. Sha'ila mislabeshes ba'al. This is in the form of ilavol. What's ilavol? That the cause, mislabeshes, manifests and dresses and clothes itself in the effect. That's bina. Shezeu hafesh ben ilavol yeshmayin. That's the difference between ilavol and cause and effect in yeshmayin. The yeshmayin hare ayin amahaves yesh nishur behelam. In yeshmayin, the ayin amahaves yesh, the state of, I don't say nothingness, the state of substanceless, that force that brings the yesh into being remains concealed. It's not mislabish.
That's the ma.
Right. To be savas mitzvah yesh v'aydesha ayin misalim mistater by yesh. The savas, because the creation, the coming to being of a yesh, of an entity of substance, is precisely because the ayin conceals itself and is hidden from the yesh kaneda. We learned this earlier as well, that if it was revealed, then the yesh would be the fiarach the ayin. Yeah. This goes back to what I said, for example, overall, I'm not saying I know the connection yet with this discussion, but one thing is for sure. All of Chassidus, and especially these sections, are coming to explain how we have to go away from our thinking. Ilav ol is you say, okay, the water is in its source, and now you have water in a cup. Or water in a river, and then you got water in a reservoir, blah, blah, blah. Till you get to water in our cup here. Okay? A mashpia makabel, same thing. A teacher has ideas, he diminishes them, he spoon feeds them. There's a relationship going on. Yesh Mayin teaches us about that there's a distance between you and the source. So there's a part of that Bina and Chochma have Yesh Ayin, but in part that is Begili, the Seichel of it. So the Bina comes like El Va'ol, where one manifests and other is not concealed. But Kolshken She'enim Eslavish is Galabay. So the Ayin with Yesh Ma'ayin is concealed and hidden from the Yesh, and for sure that it doesn't manifest and revealed in it. V'ima Yeshin is Baralil Perek Nam Gimel. And even though we explained earlier, chapter 53, the Hischatshus Dover, why they slapshus dafke, that in order to create something new, some type of new thing, you need to have a manifestation. Specifically, you can't do it from a distance. That's Perek Nun Gimel. Let me just look quickly. Right, top of page Sadik Vav. Yeah, he was talking there about Shefa and Eir.
Throwing. Hischatshus. Right? Throwing something hischatshus.
We're speaking there about ill of all being b'derech mamela and not islapshus actually. Okay, there's two sides to it. He's going to explain here. Let's see. So even though we explained earlier that it is a form of, it has to be islapshus, because it doesn't just come automatically. How does an ayin become a yesh if it doesn't commit itself to it? Had islapshus zu eina b'chinas is galus kim b'chinas helam dafka. This islapshus means it's a what's the word I want to use? He applies himself to it, but it's not in any form of revelation. It's in a form of concealment, specifically concealment. And this concealment in such a way that the ayin is not at all sensed in the yesh. Because if it did sense it or feel it, it would not be a mitzias yesh. On the other hand, by contrast, in cause and effect, the cause encloses itself, manifests, and is revealed in the effect. And specifically through that is the savasol. In other words, we're not just talking about two different types of relationships. We're talking about one here specifically and explicitly needs concealment, or else it compromises the entity, and this one specifically and explicitly needs involvement and revelation, or else it doesn't have it, or else it compromises its product. Like it says elsewhere, and explained earlier, chapter mem. Be good to look at all these obviously places, but that just okay. That'll be a little homework. Fine, chapter mem. What was chapter mem? Just want to see what it is. Chapter mem. Oh, okay. Right. It's also possible that the Rebbe Rashab saying these Mamorim Rosh Hashanah could be because people had come, and it could be people who had heard the previous Mamorim and had questions or something, and he may be answering some of those questions or explaining some things that were said earlier. I mean, that's on a very technical level, but I have no doubt that this is, I need to give it thought how this connects to the flow here. You know, why would it go such a long Maimer HaMuzgar, all to explain how Malchus needs to be Tchila? So there must be a difference between Malchus is Yesh Ma'ayin maybe, and Chachma bin Ilah Va'ol. That's what I'm assuming, but I'd rather not speculate. I'm just saying it because, for the record. So there we go. So as B'Ktzad and Perek Mem. And in this way, Ilah Va'ol, this form, it's also, that's how it is in Chachma Bina. The intelligence. He keeps emphasizing the intelligence. We're not talking about the ma. We're not talking about the riyah, the seeing, the conviction, the hanocha, the isamtus, the truth. The seichel, the nekuda, the point of seichel, with the Chachma mislabeshes mizgale ba'asaga. That manifests and gets revealed in the comprehension. They're not two worlds. That's the whole meaning of comprehension. If this is a perfect one. Sometimes someone says an idea, and someone else starts giving a whole explanation, and the person says, you know what? It's a very nice explanation, but it's not it's not the point I made. So the whole point of Hasaga, this happens quite often, as you can imagine. The Rebbe once wrote an interesting answer. Oh, no, what was it? The Rebbe spoke about something, I'm trying to remember what it was, and someone tried to slug it up, and try to find all kinds of it. So the Rebbe said that what the guy said is excellent, it's real sound Torah, but it's not connected to anything I said. So he slugged up, why are you talking to me? What you're saying is very good, but not about what I'm saying. I'm talking about something else. So you often have this. That's already a different story. So being the Hasaga is in the Nakuda, obviously. Now he's going back to the other side. Okay, so that's the Ilav all part. So Chachma and Bina have a relationship. One is the root of the other. One is comprehending the Seichel that's in the Nakuda, and here it's, as he said, Harchova spreads out, Emek, depth of it. But now he wants to connect it. What about the Hanocha? What about that conviction we spoke about? And the conviction that's in this spark, in the point of the Seichel of the Chochmah. That's already the Ayin. That's not comprehensible by Bina. In other words, Bina can comprehend the Seichel part of Chochmah, so it's a point. But there's a whole dimension of Chochmah Bina does not get, does not comprehend.
But Bina always has to be always looking at that Chochmah. Still can't take its eyes, so to speak. Right,
because it can't get lost. It'll get lost. 1 second. So he's going to say now, Halizeh b'shtei panim. This is like two ways to understand this. It's in two ways. That's literally Halizeh b'shtei panim. Two ways. Two ways that we say this ayin is not musig in bina. What is the two ways? Oy shaloi mezehu hisavas hasaga. One way you could say is oy, or either or. Oy. Or one way, Shalom Mizeh, not from this hanocha, from this conviction, is the creation, is the emergence of the comprehension of bina. V'hainu, the comprehension comes from the point in the chokhmah of the seichel and chod. But the conviction of chokhmah remains concealed, and bina has no relationship with it. So bottom line, what it means simply this. The ayin is not musig b'bina. The ayin remains chachma's domain. The only thing that travels over is...
That's a conscious, not one bina.
Yeah, it's a simple explanation, right? Is the conviction remains with chachma, remains concealed from bina. Hainu shebe'esi dias inyim menekudas ha'askola. Spelling it out even further. Which means, hainu, that is, that during at the time, shebe'es, during the comprehension of this inyan, from the spark, from the point of the seichel of Chachma. Misha shaykh li yediyah zud in the kudas haskol the Chachma. He has in parentheses. We're talking about someone who's capable of having an understanding of the point of the idea of Chachma. Ikri shel yediyah b'chinas hanocha. Yeah. So the primary thing of this knowing, we're not talking about Bina now, by the way. We're talking about Chachma. The first way. That means during the, why does he say the parentheses? Because you could ask a question. Is there a way of relating to Chachma without Bina? The answer is yes. There's a yediyah. There's a certain, those that are capable are able to get some type of, like they hear a Nakuda, that's not fleshed out, but they get something. The one who's able. The primary thing of this so-called awareness and perception is in a state of conviction. And when it comes into comprehension, that conviction remains concealed. And what comes revealed in the comprehension is only the seichel in that spark. Okay, very clear. He just wanted to spell it out even further to say, what is hanocha without havona? The answer is there is something that you have, that type, those that relate to it relate to that conviction. It's almost like, like you're sitting and brainstorming, someone comes up with an idea. And someone, not everyone will say this, but one of you will say, excellent. They get it right away. They get what the person said, and some will not get it. So that getting is primarily, they're not getting the seichel of it, they're getting yes, you hit the nail on, it's like, you're right. And someone will say, can you explain it? I can't explain it. Later it's fleshed out. And when you flesh it out, that conviction is concealed. Even though, I think we learned also, and this is true, that at the end of Bina, you can come back and explain even to someone who didn't get it, the conviction, but it's the conviction of Chachma that you're getting through the process. Okay.
It's not the level of seeing, though.
Right. That's one way to explain it. Oi, another way, that's Shnei Ponim. Second way, Oi, Lepomim, K'sheisavus Hasogihim Hanocha Shebenekudas Haskola, at times, when the emergence, or the coming into being of the comprehension, is from the conviction in the Nekudas Haskola, not the Sichli, the conviction in it. That is that the feeling of this conviction comes into Asoga Primis, he comes into an internal comprehension of the subject, which means that he came to the Nekudas Haskola v'Anocha, he came to both the Seichel and the conviction as a Toktzach Tzu wie hat sich bei ihm gelegt der Ayin Beis auf lehem Tzos Ayin. That means that the person is applying himself and concentrating. How did he come to that? How did he come to that conviction? In other words, there's like the comprehension of the conviction, so to speak. I want to finish reading to understand it clearly, but it sounds like that. That when he came to that, when that innovation came to him, he's applying himself and trying to figure out what. How did
he get that epiphany?
Yeah, how did he get it? And yeah, exactly. He then comes to a deeper understanding, to a deeper and inner understanding of the whole thing. One second, let me just see something. Stay upon it. Okay, yeah, I got it. I think I got it. What he's saying is like this. Yeah. What he's saying like this. He's adding. Yeah, on a simple level, you can simply say that we said till now is clear. Chochmah Bina is El Va'ol. It's all. The fact that Chochmah Bina are Yesh and Ayin, that's a separate thing completely. Yesh and Ayin, because of different source, there are two different ways of thinking. Chochmah is a Ayin way of thinking, seeing, conviction, and Bina is a Yesh way of thinking, comprehension. Two different sources. That's Yesh. There's an element of Yesh and Ayin there. But you talk about the Havana, the Havana, the Seichel of it. So there, it's like a river and a spring and a river. So there's Ilav Ol, Yesh Ma'ayin, the Ayin is concealed from the Yesh. And Chochmah Bina is not concealed. The Chochmah, it travels into Bina, and the Bina is comprehending that which you conceived of. Right. The question now is, what is the relationship between Bina and the fundamental thing that's different than Bina in Chochmah? The conviction, the Ayin. So one way you can simply say is, there's no relationship. Meaning, it's concealed. It's exactly like that. Yesh and Ayin. It's not musig. In other words, like he said before with Yesh Ma'ayin, it's not, in this case, there's no Ilav Ol going on. Why? Because Bina, because the conviction of Chachma remains concealed from Bina, as opposed to the Seichel of Chachma does not remain concealed. That's one way to say. Now he's going deeper and saying no. There's also an element that the comprehension of Bina comes from not from the Seichel of Chachma, but from the conviction of Chachma. And that's when a person applies himself to try to understand. It's not just, I had a spark an idea, and then someone fleshes it out. You're using Bina to try to understand the conviction of Chachma, not the Seichel of Chachma, that conviction. He's saying clearly there's such a state. Then you come to a deeper understanding of that conviction. But he's going to say now that this is still Yesh Ma'ayin, it's still not Ilav Ol. Even this second explanation. Because the conviction itself fundamentally is not comprehended. Because it's fundamentally higher than comprehension. It's only from the power of this conviction he came to comprehension. This is true both ways, but especially the second way, because the first way the conviction is altogether not in play, so to speak. I mean, maybe minimally. Here he's talking about even if the conviction has an element of comprehension, meaning the comprehension is resulting from it, or is trying to understand it, still, fundamentally, there's two different things. Comprehension and conviction is two different realities.
He saw something and then he's trying to understand what he...
Yeah, but I'm trying to distinguish between the oi and the oi, because in both of them, it's coming from the chachma. But one, you're not focusing on the conviction at all. You're just, okay, you saw, now you're comprehending. Here, even if you try to analyze and you're trying to go deeper into that, in other words, you could explain why this is so, why you're so convinced, but the conviction itself is still beyond. Even if you can explain the conviction with Bina, it's still a state beyond it.
For another chachma.
Yeah. So he says, "Shaharim kedun shesh ma'ayin she'anoch bo b'hasaga she'ayu ma'al ma'asaga rak ma she'b'kei hanoch bo yidei hasaga ve'ein zeh k'may b'asichli she'b'nakuda." And it's not like the first thing, the seichel of the nakuda. When you understand the seichel of the seichel within the point, because there the seichel itself, whatever that idea is not coming into comprehension. Here you're talking about the conviction of the idea, the emes of it, the truth of it. One second. He says in the bottom, ergish ha'anoche. Okay. Yeah, probably. So it's like this. Whereas the conviction, that's only what, through the hergish, through the feeling of the conviction, he comes to a greater understanding. So in other words, there's a comprehension that's related to conviction, but it's still not conviction. There's a comprehension that's not related. Okay. Wow. It'd be interesting to find a few examples for this. That would be really good. If you can find a good example. Someone's convinced of someone comes to some, they come up with an idea, and the idea clinked, you know that it's right. And then you hire somebody, he doesn't have to know that it's right, all he has to do is simply flesh it out. Doesn't matter whether he's so convinced or not.
Yourself has to be
either yourself or somebody else.
But with yourself, you have to have the heritage that the chachma is right, so to speak.
Or even another person could say they want to focus on that element of getting to know that it's absolutely right. Obviously, if someone's going to write it up and flesh it out in a plan, it would be good that they should also have the conviction.
Right.
But
should believe in what they told.
The point that he's trying to make here is the bottom line, which is so critical, I think, to the whole interface of Ayin Beis, because Chochmah is a big key, is that there's a place where Seichel meets beyond Seichel. That's the bottom line. That's why he's saying conviction is not Seichel at the end of the day, even though it's like one step away. And this is not conviction, remember, this is not Amunah. Remember earlier he said, this is not Rotzen. This is not Keser. This is not Amunah. This is probably why he's bringing it. Because in Amunah, you actually suspend the Seichel. Here, Seichel meets conviction. Seichel is meeting something that's beyond Seichel. But you can't call it faith. It's a Seichel-dika conviction at the end of the day. It's not an Amunah-dika conviction. It's not like you know for sure, like, you have to give your life for God or something, or some type of truth on that level. This truth could also be a truth, a scientific truth. It doesn't even have to have Kedusha in it. No, it's not necessarily a godly thing. That Seichel by nature, we talked about this, Seichel by nature has elements that are beyond. I mean, that's the big picture for sure that we're getting from this. Now the relevance to, I'm thinking transcendence, is this where he's trying to say that Chachma meets transcendence? Maybe. Because it's a subtle transcendence. It is. Hanoch the conviction is a subtle form of transcendence within Seichel. But all this is still Ilva Olol, and the other part is Ilva Olol. That's a Seichel. Okay, fine. Let's continue. Harizeh kedugmas yesh ma'ayin. So this is therefore in a form of yesh and ayin. Because even the second explanation, that you're trying to comprehend, and the hanocha, the conviction is bringing a deeper comprehension, but still two worlds, and therefore it's yesh and ayin. So it's similar to yesh ma'ayin. I'll just throw in something else which comes to mind. If you remember, a big point of departure, which I should have mentioned it more than I have, is early on when he spoke about is Atzilus Gileah Helam or Yesh Ma'ayin. So which is a very big part of the interface. So the beginning is pupar. The kelim ayesh ma'ayin. The air is gilei helam. Then he goes deeper that even the air, because it's siur, is gilei helam from esesfir sagnuzis, but yesh ma'ayin from the rotzen, basically. Like he's saying here, or the air ein sof, whatever. Yeah. No, that's all being. I'm just bringing it all back here because it's still relevant. In other words, there's a part where we're distant from existence is distant, and there's a part that it's close. I'm not talking about the kavana atmis, that's for sure, that God wants it all. But we're talking about in Giluyim. In Giluyim, there's a part that we're distant, and there's a part that we're close. Right. So it's like Ave and Yira, essentially.
There's a level of chachma on every level. So
that's exactly what I'm leading to. So on a more microcosmic level, you can say that Natsilis has both Gilei Helam, Yesh Ma'ayin. Same thing, Bina and Chachma have that. Bina has a Gilei Helam of Chachma, the Seichel of it. It's Yesh Ma'ayin when it comes to the Hanocha of it, in a subtle form. That's that. So what I'm saying, because tying it all together, it's critical. There's no question. If you remember when we spoke about Chachma Binun, he was using the examples in Er Pnimi.
That's why it's an interface all the time.
Right. The immanent energy, remember he kept on saying that two levels, the levels of gradation of Milo Mata in the spheres, he kept using Chachma Bina as an example. So I explained that, and I don't think it's just an example, it's because in a microcosm, Chachma Bina exactly that. They too reflect the distance and closeness to...
but actually Chachma alone.
Because I will tell you even further, the secret, and Moshe always kind of chachzich in this, the secret of creating a formula that works for us in our lives based on this, a template, a program, is finding these ideas in our personal lives. Because in our lives, these two things are critical all the time. This is like the Ratzi and Shuv. You always, in any relationship, there has to be a measure of closeness and intimacy, but there has to be also a measure of respect and space. We compromise one or the other, everything in existence gets destroyed if you don't have these two elements. A measure of, I call it awe and respect, space, and distinction, and unity. When you try to be united when you should be distinct, you'll be distinct when you should be united, like the Rebbe once told somebody. When you try to be close when you should be distant, you'll be distant when you should be close. In other words, like you see in even a human body, when food goes down your gullet, every part of the body does what it has to do. The air pipe should be closing and not letting food in there. And then it opens when it needs to open. It's like a process of million little steps, everything doing its part. There are times when you're together, times when you're separate. And that's a critical element, really. In godly terms, it means we need to know that we have that God is beyond us completely. You don't want to make God on your terms. On the other hand, you want to have a relationship with God. It's not just He's the master, we're the slave. So this constant balance of Ava and Yira. Ava means a closeness. Yira means a certain sense of awe. Is a critical dance in everything in life. And anything that's not healthy is more or less, you can attribute to some type of imbalance, either too close or too distant. It's like anything. It's like even a switch. When a switch is broken, let's say the light is on all the time. Or it's broken, it's too distant. It's a constant process of finding the perfect balance where when do they come together, when do they separate. And when I'm just applying it more. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, speaking in Chachma Bina and in high levels here, and if you go Lifnei Tzimtzum, it's for sure. Even what we're talking about, the whole Erchezer Yeshe. It's important to have a level of Eir Ein Sof that does not have any shape, form, and anything, because that gives us a taste of what Elokus is like. And then you need to have the Ratzon. Then you need to have each thing even uses the word Samamutza between two Mamutzayim, need a new Mamutza. So it's a story of interfaces and interfaces and interfaces, basically. And the challenge is to find the exact spot. I think about it now. I think the Rebbe and all the Rabbeim. The Rebbe came to this world, came to America. A whole different situation. The Alter Rebbe would not recognize America like this. Secular Jewish life, complacency, no gzedus. We could do whatever we like. And the Rebbe had to be an interface to take.
Against Napoleon because he didn't want them to.
Yeah. And then the Rebbe said that's in his body, but it's a different world. No, but the Rebbe explained because now through what we've done, we have now come to a point. The Alter Rebbe would be today. He would agree with the Rebbe. He would say the same thing. It's just the world changed. The Rebbe wasn't changing. Have a different shitta. But the point I'm making here is that the Rebbe had to be an interface between Chassidus and the old world, so to speak, and the new world. How do you integrate? In other words, it's always that story. How do you match two distant realities? Because take away an approach that Chassidus brings, look as it is. The frum world has no way, they don't know how to deal with the modern world. They don't know how to deal with it. They can make money there and build insulated ghettos to protect themselves, but how do you deal with a secular world without being annihilated by it, and also engaging with it? And today it's impossible not to engage with it. So this is, I'm just taking Chochmah and Bina into...
That's the formula. You say to them, you have to go out to work.
Exactly. And remember what he said. Because the Keach comes from Pnim. Exactly right. You need Bina to go out, but you need it to be connected to Chochmah, and you need the Ilah V'ol, and you need the Yesh Ma'ayin. I'm just spelling things out a little, maybe for myself as well. Okay, I just wanted to just tie it together.
Well, only if you go out are you Alevecha. You have the power to succeed.
Yeah, exactly.
So, not only you have the power to
Yep. The only defense is offense. Okay, so let's continue here. We'll finish this Pedic already. And nevertheless, it's only through feeling, sensing this conviction. He's talking all in the second Eifin here. And through this, specifically, you come to the understanding and comprehension of the subject. And this comprehension is in the depth of it and the inner dimensions of it. If so, it's also not like real yesh ma'ayin. He's going now the other way around. Even this element of hanocha with chokhmah and bina, it's true that hanocha remains concealed according to the first way. Even the second way, the hanocha remains apart. Because the conviction doesn't come in seichel, but nevertheless he's saying it's still closer than a real yesh ma'ayin. Because in a real yesh ma'ayin, the yesh doesn't feel ayin at all, doesn't feel anything. Here, the bina that comprehends the conviction is at least sensing the conviction. It doesn't get it, but it is trying to understand it. So he's saying, Im kain the sham ayin nirgish klal b'yesh. There, the ayin is not felt at all in the yesh. V'kan im lo yeh hergish hanocha. And here, if there was no sense, there was no feeling of the conviction, there would be no ischachus, there would be no nothing innovated in the comprehension. It only comes through the hergish hanocha, through sensing that conviction. It appears to me he's talking about the second eifin now, not the nekudas haskalah. Im kain ein ze kamoi yesh ma'ayin mamish. If that's the case, so even chokhmah bina, even the level of ayin of chokhmah, the hanocha, is also not yesh ma'ayin mamish. It's an in-between type of level. V'hadugma zeh b'chinas chokhmah bina she'en zeh b'chinas yesh ma'ayin. I'm saying he didn't finish. An example for this in chokhmah bina is that it's not in a form of yesh ma'ayin. Even that part. The saga part is for sure ilah v'ol. But even that part is not complete yesh ma'ayin. U'mashe chokhmah bina nikra ayin v'yesh. And the fact that we call chokhmah bina ayin yesh, hayin b'chinas haruchni shabina nikra yesh ruchni lo yesh mamish. What's he saying here? What we call chokhmah bina is just saying haruchni shabina, hayin b'chinas haruchnis. You mean ruchni? Shabina nikra yesh ruchni, because bina is called yesh ruchni. In other words. I got it. In yesh ma'ayin, when you have a physical reality, or a table, a chair, there's no way that it feels in any way the ayin. It's completely concealed. We discussed this earlier. Yesh ma'ayin means that there's a radical jump, there's a radical leap. When it comes to chokhmah and bina, so the seichel of it for sure is not yesh ma'ayin. It's ilah v'ol, because the seichel goes from a point to a comprehension. But what about the vision or the conviction of chokhmah? We call it ayin compared to yesh. So first he made the case that it's still, even the level of bina that tries to comprehend, or as a result of the conviction, it's still the conviction remains beyond comprehension. Correct. But it's still not quite yesh ayin, like a physical reality compared to God, the Dvar Hashem that creates existence. Because there, it's completely concealed. Here, yes, the Bina can't understand the conviction, but it is being informed by it, and it is trying to understand it, and it has some relationship with it. It's not like matter and spirit. It's not yesh and ayin. And the fact that we call Bina yesh and chokhmah ayin, it means in a ruchnius. Not that Bina is a yesh like a table. In ruchnius, Bina is a yesh ruchni, lo yesh mamish. But it's not a real yesh, physical yesh. V'gam chokhmah ain't a b'chinas ayin mamish. And also on the other hand, he says in the parentheses, chokhmah is not really complete substanceless. For example, the fact that there's a seichel in that comprehension, that alone tells you it's not complete ayin. The conviction maybe, but you can't call chokhmah completely ayin. What it says elsewhere, and now he's bringing it does say somewhere else that chokhmah is literally ayin and bina is yesh. Look in the siddur. This is the siddur, the Mittler Rebbe siddur from that is mizmer l'seidah. The meaning there is sha'ayin the chokhmah b'chinas ha'ayin shel hayesh amiti. There the meaning is that the ayin of chokhmah is the ayin of the true yesh, the ultimate yesh, God. U'kumay b'chinas hariyah, like a form, like seeing something. U'kumay derech moshel b'chinas ha'anocha. Like, for example, that state of conviction. Ubebina meir ha'ayin shel hayesh ha'netzal. And in Bina radiates the ayin of the yesh that was emanated. And look what we discussed earlier, chapter 42. Okay, briefly, the bottom line is once establishes that yesh ma'ayin of Bina, chokhmah Bina, is not like yesh ma'ayin of physical from godliness. That's clear. First of all, the Bina, chokhmah Bina are both seichel. It's right there. It doesn't say those words, but essentially that's what it is. It's a Bina's yesh is yesh and seichel, not a yesh in
itself is
and chokhmah is not really complete because chokhmah also has an akud of seichel in it. Even the hanocha, and the fact that it says elsewhere, otherwise it's really trying to point out because chokhmah represents the bittul of the source, and Bina represents the mitzias of existence. The bottom line is, if you want to talk interface, yesh ma'ayin, gashmis, and ruchnis is yesh ma'ayin. Ilav all is things that are very commensurate. Then there's chokhmah and Bina are an example of some type of in-between, where you have a distance, but it's not quite distant. Yeah, it's really like a great interface in between that has a yesh ma'ayin element to it, but there's a part that's not complete yesh ma'ayin. Bottom line is, seichel can lead us to godliness, where yesh cannot. So Bina can lead you back to God, even though Bina is ultimately comprehension of chokhmah. And it cannot ever have the conviction completely, but it can relate to it, it can appreciate it, it can analyze it, Yeah.
It has elements of
a very deep concept, because it means you could actually analyze conviction with Bina and still not have the conviction, but you could analyze it. You can discuss it. You're not talking about analyzing faith here. You're talking about analyzing the conviction of seichel. That seichel has in it something that gives it this resolute. Because in truth, you could argue, why would seichel is a creature of existence? Everything in existence is negligible and what did I want to really say? Theoretical. Why is there conviction in seichel? I'm just explaining further. You could say seichel shouldn't have conviction. There's nothing conviction. Conviction is only in God, only in emes, in soul, in spirit. Why would seichel have conviction? Because seichel is also God's creation, and God planted emes into seichel. Seichel could come to emes. It's a chiddush because not all seichel does. It can conceal truth, but in other words, the emes that's in seichel, what he says in Tanya in Perek Lamed Hey, that in chokhmah rests hula vade, the angel Laseh, that chokhmah senses that only he and nothing else, that means that seichel is a keli for bittul of elikus. So that could be the conviction of seichel is coming from that type of the truth of God that's planted into seichel, which is really embedded into existence, that seichel can lead you to God. Even though Seichel will never be God, and Seichel will not understand all of God, but Seichel is a great interface, a great path to godliness. So, right. In other words, not just faith.
Because Bina has relation with Chachma, and Chachma is the mamutza between...
You got it. And Bina is a mamutza between Chachma and lower, and that's it. Okay, that's the long parentheses. So let's conclude it now. The chapter, rather. So let's go back to the beginning of the parentheses. What did he say? He said, not Sefer Mitchosin is Malchus. He said, because Chachma is the Reishis. And Chachma to Bina is Ilah v'Ol. So bottom line is, we got from all of this that Chachma Bina is a form of Ilah v'Ol. Even its Yesh Ma'ayin is not complete Yesh Ma'ayin. So we got that picture. Fine. Now, outside the parentheses, V'cheinu b'chol esesfira is the same as just like Chachma Bina is a form of Ilah v'Ol. Same to all the esesfira, same b'chinas Ilah v'Ol. They're also in a form of cause and effect. Shehu inyan ha'ishtalshlus ha'sfiras b'sfiras atzmon. That's the inyan of ishtalshlus. Within the spheres themselves, you have also a hierarchy, a gradation, a cosmic order. So there's ishtalshlus in general, from one world to the next, from one set of spheres. Within the spheres themselves, there's also a ishtalshlus. V'zeu ad hamalchus. And this ishtalshlus, this process of cause and effect, and diminished cause and effect, like teacher-student, a commensurate gradation and diminishment that goes from level to level, goes all the way to Malchus, or min ha-Malchus isavas biyah, hu b'chinas yesh ma'ayin mamish. That's going on here. That's it. Right, exactly. And this fits exactly what I was thinking, yeah. And now Malchus, when it comes to Isavas Biyah, now we're talking about a radical jump. This is B'chinas Yesh Ma'ayin Mamish. This is literally Yesh Ma'ayin. Sha'ayin Mahava Mamish Es HaYesh, B'chinas Yischatzus Dover. The Ayin, that means the Ayin of Malchus, is bringing into being, literally bringing into being the Yesh in a complete new, Yischatzus Dover, a new innovative entity, a new created entity, V'hu B'chinas Helam L'gamri Min HaYesh. And Malchus is completely concealed from Yesh. Not like Chachma is concealed from Bina, or one sphere is concealed from the other, in Atzilus. This is a true total concealment. The koyach zeh lo yesh b'b'chinas ha-Chachma reishis Atzilus. And this power Chachma does not have. This is the power of Malchus, to conceal, to create. Chachma can't create. That's the key. Bina is not a creation of Chachma. Chachma didn't give birth to Bina. First of all, Bina doesn't come from Chachma. That's one thing. But even the seichel of Bina and Chachma, it's not birth, it's a gili. This is a spring of water, this is a river. Even the conviction, like he said, the conviction is, yes, true. The conviction is a different world than the Yesh of Bina, but there's still not Yesh Ma'ayin. It's not like the conviction gave birth to a whole new entity. There's still some revelation going on between the two. You can't maybe understand the full conviction, but you relate to it. It's conviction in Seichel, and conviction in Seichel is informing Bina in one way or other. Right. That's the key here. This is very interesting. So this is all Malchus. One second. This is going to be Malchus. He's going to say this is going to be the inyan of all the levels of Berachamecha Harabi. One second. Okay, I'm not going to let him spell it out. I'm not going to.
But from Seichel to Midas, there's one sort of a jump, and within Midas.
No, he's just saying that Yesh Yitzhak says Chala B'Seif in relation with Spasha.
Yeah. No, but 1 second. No, he wants to say Malchus as something that the Chachma doesn't have.
More than Yitzhak.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a type of Yesh Ma'ayin, let's say, from Etzach to Hod, for example?
No.
There's nothing.
Within Atzilus, there's no Yesh Ma'ayin like from Atzilus to Biyah. That's the bottom line. That's what you have to understand. Atzilus within itself, think of it, the levels before the Tzimtzum are relatively more relative to each other than after the Tzimtzum when it comes Bria. The Tzimtzum in the macrocosm is the Tzimtzum, the big Tzimtzum is like the space between Malchus of Atzilus and Biyah. That's the jump we're talking about here. We're talking about a radical new reality. You're not talking about diminishing, not fully appreciating, you're talking about a radical new reality.
One's above the Tzimtzum to each other on radical new realities?
Not quite, no. Not the same way. That's why you don't need a tzimtzum there. And here you need a tzimtzum. A tzimtzum creates an entity that's independent of its source and does not sense its source. You understand? That's the big thing. That's a critical element.
So you can't say that between Atmos and Ein Sof.
Between Atmos and Sof, but Atmos doesn't have a jump. You see, Atmos cannot be compared to a source.
Okay, forget that one.
Atmos is like...
Forget that one.
Yeah. But yes, technically speaking, everything compared to Atmos is Yesh Ma'ayin, period.
Yeah.
But remember, there are things that Atzmus wanted to reveal more of himself, and there are things that don't reveal more. Like Yesh reveals the Atzmus of Mitzvus Matzmusi, that we have no source, but it doesn't reveal godliness. It doesn't reveal holiness. The Yesh is a Yesh. It's just a blind and dumb reality. Torah reveals God's wisdom. So basically, you're saying, Atzmus is beyond everything. When you talk jumps, is like he said, there's a place where there's no Helam and no Gili. Then you don't talk jumps. In that, look, you could always make the argument that in certain situations, the higher you go, the more distant everything is. Remember, there's also the expression that Asiyah compared to Ak, the distance Ak compared to Asiyah is equal compared to the distance of Ak to beyond Ak. So you always have this Shalei Bera. But here, practically speaking, yes, Atzilus is more or less Ilav all Gilui Helam within itself, and Biyah is look, he's all coming to explain this. Remember, the point here was to say the Makif of Atzilus is the last thing he was talking about, how it affects the Neshamas, Avim Esoteris. We're going back to understanding the Makifim of Biyah. That's really where he's going to. And the Makifim of Biyah, we spoke about the Makifim of the 5 levels, which is as it comes into being. He's now talking on the lower level, the Malchus of Atzilus. Okay. This Kayach, this power of creating something new. In a Gersa case, she calls it the power of the Eretz. That Afke Eretz. Shemayim cannot, Shemayim does not produce vegetation. Land, earth. Because earth is Malchus, so you have the Yesh Ma'ayin, that with that, the fact that earth can produce produce is an example of Yesh Ma'ayin of Malchus. Who bechinas helm legamri min hayesh? Okay. What's am I skipping? Okay, right. Okay, this is complete. This power is not in Reishis Atzilus. Shagam hayisavs ma'chochma shebedugus yesh ma'ayin bechinas yesh ma'ayin mamish kanal. Because even that which comes from chochma, the savas that comes from chochma, is not really yesh ma'ayin mamish, literally. Remember again, mamish and not mamish. It's a very important distinction. When you say not mamish, it means it has similarities, but it's not the actual thing. Which means, by the way, it also means, remember he spoke before Esa Bereshis, he says Bereshis, what did he say Esa Bereshis? 2 interpretations. The Chochmah is like Asiyah, and the Chochmah is the Chochmah Senivra. With Chochmah he creates. That Esa Bereshis, he's saying, is really much more Malchus than it is in Chochmah. Even that's not, he creates with Chochmah. But Chochmah is not the creative force. Where does this power lie? In Keser, which brings into being the Chochmah from nothing. Kesed has that power, but not Chochmah. And even from Kesed, it's only a Yesh HaNetzel. It's only not a Yesh HaNivra. It's not Yesh from Bria. It's a Yesh Netzel, meaning in the world of emanation, it's a Yesh Ma'ayin Timotza, from nothing. And this power is also in Malchus, Keser Malchus, remember? That's not said. It means Malchus takes from Keser that's higher than Chochmah, which is Reishis. The wedge. Keser is wedged in Malchus, Malchus is wedged in Keser. The Havis Yesh Ma'ayin, the Biyah, to create from nothing, B'riyat Yasiyah, the Be'emes Harakeach Hazeh, Huma Atzmus Ein Sof. In truth, this Keach comes from essence of As Atzmus, Commission is Boileel, the Hulavad, the Bekeach Vichol Telivre. And only he can create.
You can throw in Das that we don't use Keser when we say Das, because it acts like that too.
Okay, so he didn't finish, we still have to go through the 5 levels. Well, we will, next chapter. So bottom line, let me sum up this chapter and we'll conclude here. So we did chapter 73. I'll do the Kitzur. We can say, Hey Madregas Hanal. These 5 levels above. Which 5 levels? Adonu Zenu, Tzur Mizgavenu, Tzur Mizgav, Magin Yeshenu, Tzur Mizgavadenu, and Rachem Aleinu is the first. Rachem Aleinu. And then the other 4, Rancha, right. That which is the levels of what? Let's just spell it out. It's the Rotzen, the desire, that's not yet revealed to himself. There's the 10 hidden spheres, that's the first 2. That's Rachem Aleinu and Adenu Zenu. Then comes Tzur Mizgavenu is Ak, Bria de Klolos. Magin Yeshenu is Yitzir de Klolos, Avram, Akudim. And Mizgav Badenu is Asir de Klolos. Those 5 are now also in Malchus of Atzilus. The Hine not so say not Klolos B'Sefer B'Chinas Malchus Yetzer B'Chochma. Because now the beginning is wedged in the end, in Malchus more than in Chachma. The Chachma bin hen ilav all. Chachma bin are cause and effect. Is galus habinu ha'idei Chachma. The revelation of bin is through Chachma. V'nekudas haskol the Chachma museg is bebina. And the point of the idea in Chachma is comprehended in bina. Shezeh in ilav, that's ilav all, cause and effect. And the conviction, the intellectual conviction, is above asaga and concealed from it. Or through the conviction you come to a deeper comprehension. That's through feeling and sensing this conviction, even though it's not comprehensible. And even that is there's a hergish there.
That's the thing that the Manichem knows about to change it from Sogat Anacha to the Kitzah.
Okay. It's also there, it's as far as the Muchach. V'yesh Mayin Shanel Mayin the Gamri. V'yesh Mayin is that the Ayin is completely concealed, the Eino Murgish Klan, and not felt at all. V'chein Kol Esed Spheres and B'chin Silav. All the 10 spheres are in this form of cause and effect. Aval Malchus Mahava Mayin the Yesh Mamish. Malchus creates literally from nothing, from something. Something from nothing. This power comes from Keser and from Atzmus Ein Sof. So we'll stop here. We did chapter 73, page 136 through 138.